choices shape the market, our society, and our quality of life. That's why Euroconsumers helps millions of people in their daily choices, providing simple solutions to complex problems. Euroconsumers is a cluster of organizations, a network of people, a group established to protect consumer rights and well-being that brings consumers and companies together in transparent relationships of trust that respect their independence. Our deep understanding of products and consumption gives consumers a credible, expert voice worldwide. We bridge the gap between buyers and manufacturers, between supply and demand. And in this digital age, we create opportunities for all parties to come together in constructive dialogue, partnering to build a future of better products and services. Euroconsumers has the power of a global group that believes humanity can develop, grow, and change for the better, and that we can promote this by uniting millions of consumers in strength and speaking responsibly for them while simultaneously engaging in relationships of trust with responsible, sustainable companies.
Good afternoon and welcome to the very first of Euroconsumers Start Talking webinars. My name is Liz Coll and I'm an expert in digital consumer policy and protection, formerly head of digital at Consumers International and founder of Connected Consumers, a strategic consultancy which advises businesses, consumer groups, standards bodies on digital consumer issues. Before I introduce our excellent panel today and the topic they'll be discussing, I'd like to hand over to Els Brugman, who is Head of Policy and Enforcement at Euroconsumers, who will welcome you all. Els.
Well, thank you, Liz, and welcome everyone to what basically is a bit of a pilot. This is the number 0 version of a new webinar series, Start Talking, that if all goes well, we want to conduct on a monthly basis to talk about items that are not on the political agenda yet or are quite new, or about important consumer trends where it's important for us to anticipate a bit. It is in the DNA of us as Euroconsumers to explore innovation. We don't like to walk paths that are already beaten. We like to explore new paths, and not all of them will probably be successful, but we are convinced this is the way to go if we want to raise discussion and if we want to come to concrete, tangible results for consumers. Now, as you can see from our panel, we love to bring together different parties, industries, and civil society organizations, so we can dialogue, because at Euroconsumers, we absolutely believe in dialogue. We like to hear all points of view without prejudice or discrimination. And the reason why is that just because we have our own very solid and robust ideas, we like to compare them with others. We like to challenge them because only by testing our own beliefs, we will be absolutely sure that they are the right ones. So having that said, Liz, I'm going to go back to you, leaving the word to you. And so I would say, let's start talking.
Thanks very much, Els. So the topic for discussion today is age verification to copyright infringement, to preserve or not to preserve anonymity. But I think we'll find out there's a whole host of other issues tied up in that title. So basically, in response to mounting pressure from consumer groups, parents, regulators, and activists, there's been this discussion that's ongoing about whether many of the internet services and social sites that we all use, perhaps that we rely on every day, should be carrying out much stricter checks about who's posting, who's accessing, and who's using those spaces online. So this has raised the question of whether websites and platforms perhaps need to force users to actually prove exactly who they are. Is it worth it to keep people safe and to be able to track down offenders? Or is this one compromise too far on our privacy and anonymity? Will it reduce free expression and hurt communities that otherwise benefit from having an anonymity online? This struggle is a familiar one between, on the one hand, keeping consumers and people safe online, and the other hand, protecting everyone's privacy. So I'm very pleased to be here today to open up this debate with a really great mixed panel, which I'm now going to introduce you to. And I'm going to start by introducing Marco Pancini, who is Director of Public Policy at YouTube. Welcome, Marco. Next, I'd like to introduce Theo Bertram, who is VP of Government Relations and Public Policy for Europe at TikTok. Hi, Theo. Next, we have Stefano Quintarelli, who's a digital and cyber expert. He chairs the advisory group on advanced technologies at the UN Centre for Trade Facilitation and Electronic Business. He was a former chairman of the steering board at the Italian Digital Agency, an entrepreneur, technologist, someone who sits between many different realms. So welcome. We're very pleased to have you here today, Stefano. Next, we have Max Beverton-Palmer, who is Director of the Internet Policy Unit at the Tony Blair Global Institute, who do a lot of work, many things, but one of them is a technology program looking to the future and how to improve the internet. Next, we have Marie-Paule Benassi, who is Head of Enforcement of Consumer Law and Redress at DG Just in the Commission. So welcome, Marie. And finally, last but not least at all, we have Marisa Jimenéz, who is Director and Deputy Head of EU Affairs at Meta. So welcome, Marisa, and welcome, everybody. So we're going to kick off and start the discussion with an intervention from Stefano Quintarelli. And he's going to talk through his concept for how we might find a more effective way of managing balancing out these different user needs by using a trusted intermediary service that would provide protected anonymity. I hope I've got that right, Stefano, but you'll tell us much more about it. After that, we'll have a discussion and bring in the rest of the panel, and we're aiming to wrap up and finish by 3:45. So, Stefano, over to you. And just may I please ask you to keep to your allotted 15 minutes so we've got time for discussion afterwards. Okay, thanks very much.
It's a pleasure and an honor to be. Really the first speaker in the first event of Euroconsumers, of this new series of Euroconsumers podcasts. So I will try to stay within 15 minutes, and I would like to start by establishing some firm points very quickly. Perhaps some of you remember this brilliant advertisement from Apple Computers. It said, you see a Macintosh there. It was a first ad for a Mac, and that was derived from a talk that Steve Jobs gave, where he compared personal computers to bicycles for the mind. And so actually now computers are rockets for our minds. They're not bicycles. Whenever we take something that is physical, that is material, and an activity, and we digitize it, it increases in speed and scale to a level that far exceeds our human capabilities. The problem is that analog institutions, that our traditional institutions, can't cope with digital problems, with the scale and speed of digital problems. So one possible option is to say, okay, let's stop the world I want to get down and kill some business model. A second option, which is the option that is now prevailing, is to somehow delegate the first degree of justice to the intermediaries, because the institution can cope with the scale and speed, the dimensions of the phenomenon. When we do this, these intermediaries, social networks, social media, etc., they use AI in order to take decisions on the legitimacy of the content, of the actions of the users. But we must bear in mind, and this is going to grow, and this is going to grow because essentially, I would say statistically, it works. And so the request from politicians will grow. And so it's going to, that the usage of AI is going to grow in content moderation and become very pervasive in anything. And but we know that AI is error prone, because machine learning is inherently makes some mistakes, and somehow we must redress to these mistakes with some human verification. Then in some jurisdictions, we have some clear provisions, for example, in Italy and Spain, that we call riserva di lei, riserva di legge. So everything is privacy is ensured except in cases limited by law. Unfortunately, when you do this technically, you cannot make this kind of violation of law accepted. So everything is guaranteed except in the cases provided by the law, because with technology, it way or technology alone to address these issues. We need to bring in some other dimensions to the problem, because technology alone is not sufficient. Then another very important point to bear in mind is this: privacy is a fundamental right. On the internet, you have the right not to disclose you're a dog, rephrasing a famous cartoon. We are anonymous online as we decided to be. But please notice that we already are not anonymous to many entities online to which we don't want to be anonymous. Retailers that ship us goods, banks, insurances, utilities, even our digital identity within the EIDAS framework. So this is one last, and here is one last point to bear in mind. And remedies so far has been the measures that we have taken has been concentrated in trying to remedying infringements. And this is somehow akin to what happened in 1830, when Robert Peel introduced the bobbies in police, where he invented the bobbies. So he tried not to remedy the infringement, but to prevent it. So prevent the opportunity of misconduct. This is somehow a paradigm that I think we are ready to follow now online. There are many persons, many subjects in this that have some conflicting interests in these topics. Persons, citizens want anonymity, privacy protections, want their rights to be respected. They want an effective redress. Service provider would like to have a liability exemption, would like to avoid excessive burden. They want homogeneity, because you cannot have some situation in Germany that is different in France or in Italy. They want to have a scalable solution. They need to have a scalable solution. Courts want, of course, to respect the rule of law, to have the possibility of dealing with the cases, so to have a manageable scale and speed. Content providers, publishers, etc., they want real-time measures, they want takedown, and they want stay down for their content, because they own the rights. Law enforcers want the possibility to prosecute those who misbehave, criminals. Politicians, of course, want to please their constituencies, and there are many conflicting angles to this topic. And I think that society should be interested in not having chilling effects for legit content. The question, of course, is how can we keep all these apparently conflicting interests together? We have two cases where we can start to learn from. For example, age verification. With age verification, the person submits to the social network their age. Then the social network relies to a trusted third party asking, is this age correct? The trusted third party says yes or no. If it is yes, then it enrolls the social network enrolls the users and provides the user access. This is a very simple way how we bring in a trusted third party in the game to verify to do not specifically age verification, but the fact that somebody can be entitled to access certain services or not. Another example could be the public Wi-Fi hotspot, where a person with a desktop initiates to the server, to the let's say, for example, when you try to access the public Wi-Fi in Brussels airport. From your desktop, initiate a request to the server sends a code, a token to the MNO that gives it to the mobile of the user via an SMS, and then the user copies this token into the desktop web browser, and then the user is able to access the web. So these are some protocols that bring in third or fourth parties in play in order to accomplish certain function. The token is tied to the mobile number, and this allows the person to be knowable. So the airport in the Brussels airport does not know the identity of the user, but the identity of the user can be knowable to law enforcement in case of misconduct, because we know in many cases throughout Europe a mobile number is linked to an identity. Now, something has happened recently that has changed the scenario, and it's the case you all know about Poland versus the Parliament and the Council, where the Advocate General's opinion in this case says sharing service providers must only detect and block content that is identical or equivalent to the protected subject matter identified by right holders. Identical or equivalent. That is to say, content the unlawfulness of which may be regarded as manifest in the light of information provided by right holders. So if the artificial intelligence says this is for sure an infringement, then it must be blocked. It must be detected and blocked. By contrast, in all ambiguous situations, short extracts from works included in longer content, transformative works, etc., in which, in particular, the application of exceptions and limitations to copyright is reasonable, foreseeable, the content concerned should not be the subject of prevented blocking measure. So it should be published. The risk of overblocking is minimized. Right holders will have to request the removal or blocking of the content in question by means of substantiated notifications, or even refer the matter to a court for a ruling on the lawfulness of the content, and in the event that it is unlawful, order its removal or blocking. Okay, this is akin to what I said before of the reserva de ley, reserva di legge. So everything should be done in this way, except in some cases. The point is that artificial intelligence often flags things like ambiguous. And so what do we do? How do we treat this ambiguous content? By the way, there are some cases that cannot even be detected by AI, because AI does not and will never be able to detect, to understand parody. So I will try to come with a proposed protocol, very simple protocol for this ambiguous content, not looking at remedying an infringement, but preventing the insurgence of the infringement. So I would call it a digital Bobby for the possibly illicit content. By the way, this is explicitly stated in the high-level expert group on artificial intelligence recommendations to the European Commission, where under the redress by design recommendation. So the idea here is the person does upload some ambiguous content to the social network detects that it's ambiguous, so the AI of the social network detects that it's ambiguous, and he notifies the user of legal implications. Then, is the user willing to assume responsibility for that content? If no, then the content is not published. If yes, we need somehow to be able to hold the user accountable without disclosing their identity. And that's where we can bring in a trusted service provider, a trust service provider. The user can obtain a protected anonymity token from the trust service provider, and then can associate that token to the content. So somehow it's like when we associate our web browser with the code when we access the Wi-Fi. In that case, as the opinion I read before, the content is published, and eventually it starts a notification to right holders or to law enforcement for a review of the case. This is a very simple add-on to the present procedures that has many implications. First of all, I would say it's easier, doing this is easier than logging into a public hotspot. The trust service provider does not know the content or motivation of the token request. The social network does not know the real identity. Redress is immediate, so the content is not blocked, like the opinion from the court, from the European Court of Justice. It eliminates the areas of uncertainty in liability exemption, because it's very clear. Responsibility lies on the users in case the content is published because he's taking on a responsibility. This ensures the courts are in charge and not private service providers. So we're not delegating decision, the first degree of justice, to service provider. It quickly converges to an extreme reduction of illicit uploads, because once you know that you can be trackable and what you're doing is illicit, then there is some, I would say, some pedagogical implication in this. It reduces the number of cases, because reduction of illicit uploads implies immediately the reduction in numbers of cases, and then they become in a number and a scale and a speed that is manageable to our analog institutions. It allows law enforcers to identify misconducts. The account suspension of termination can be determined by the court. There is no chilling effect for alleged content, like the opinion of the court is requiring. The solution is scalable and may be homogeneous, because the EU can have a role in this play, because we can leverage in our principles, in our values, to become the world's online trusted third party. A very last thing, trust service provider, in my opinion, there are some add-ons that are desirable. For example, trust service providers should delete the tokens after a specific time frame, let's say, I don't know, 2 years, 1 year, 5 years, 6 months, whatever. Once granted these tokens, they should be kept offline in order to prevent cyber attacks. Trust service providers can leverage various degrees of identification mechanism. You don't need to have a fully fledged eIDAS digital identity. You can rely on credit cards, data, or mobile phones, etc. So indirect user identity verification. And the important element is that this trust service provider must be trustworthy and audited. And by the way, we have already a similar infrastructure in Europe, throughout all Europe, where we have a number of trust service providers that do exactly this type of trust services, and they are trustworthy, and there is a very strong audit and sanction mechanism already in place. So this would be my proposal, an add-on to the existing protocols. Very simple, to bring in trust service providers, as you said in the beginning, and that is compliant with a possible implementation of the opinion of the court, and that satisfies the requirements of, I would say, all the stakeholders on this topic. And thank you very much. I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Stefano. That was really interesting. I suppose for me, my first question would be that this idea of trusted intermediaries to help manage lots of challenges in digital environments has been around for quite a while. Why do you think now is the right time to be thinking seriously about applying it more widely?
Because when we applied when we approved the copyright directive, everybody was trying to pull in their own directions. I mean, parties were not really trying to find a common ground, a compromise on a possible solutions, because everybody thought that they were going to win, content right holders and platforms, etc. But now that is approved, and now we have this opinion and this case of Poland versus the European Commission. So. I mean, it's the right time to start to thinking about a possible complementary measures.
And you think this has wider potential, not just for copyright, but for dealing with other types of content that needs to be
absolutely
verified? Yeah,
absolutely. As I said in one of the premises is AI. The role of AI in moderating content online is going to grow significantly for everything, and so either we accept that a private company is the first degree of justice, or we need to bring the whole thing to a level manageable by our analog institutions. And this type of preventing bobbies, digital bobbies, is a way to reduce this scale and bring it all back to analog manageable scales.
That's interesting. I'm just going to bring in Marie-Paule now from the Commission, because I'm sure that you've been thinking a lot about just how to achieve this balance between, and in this case, it's between the privacy of people potentially posting content and consumer protection. So why is this balance so important for digital Europe? I think you're just on mute, Marie. That's great. I can hear you now.
Consumer law, and I'm in charge of the implementation of consumer law. So there are many domains, of course, which are concerned by your questions, but in relation to consumer law, what is clear is that who is selling something cannot be has to be identified. So if anybody who is posting something with the intention to making a post with the intention to sell something, has to be identified for the consumer. So I think that this is a key principle, and which is difficult to achieve in the digital world. And so this is why we are developing at the union level more and more legislation which requires the intermediaries to play a role in enabling the identification of traders, as you see, for example, in the proposal of the Commission on the DSA. So this, I think, it's a question now of how this is implemented and how to prevent illegal activities, as mentioned by our previous speaker. And I like this idea of digital cops, because if there are technical solutions, to check who are the people selling and whether they are well identified, I think that this would be something very useful. Then the other elements which I think have to be taken into account is also the anonymity for the person who is receiving the content and who may be exposed to illegal commercial activities. And there we have a tension between the necessity to keep the anonymity of these people and to protect the consumer, and especially the vulnerable consumers. So this is why it's an interesting topic that you are discussing today, because on age verification, for example, because there, in order to do it, the anonymity of the person, and these are especially vulnerable consumers, children and kids, has to be fully respected, while at the same time enabling to detect a situation where they would be exposed to illegal content. So in the consumer legislation, we have this concept of professional diligence, which is very important, and where we expect intermediaries to do their utmost to, at the same time, protect the personal data of the people, their anonymity, but implement the necessary measures to prevent that they are exposed to illegal content. And here I'm speaking of illegal commercial content, but it can be also, of course, plenty of other illegal content to which the users of digital markets are exposed. So I would like to stop here, and I'm really would be very happy to hear what the other members of the panel have to say.
Thank you very much. So let's hear from someone else on the panel. I'm going to turn to Theo now, Theo Bertram from TikTok. Do you think we're seeing a big growth in the challenges around protecting anonymity of users or people creating and sharing? Is it growing, and what are the kind of problems with that?
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks very much for inviting me. I think the debate around anonymity has really grown in Europe in the last, especially in the last year or so. And I think there's two broad elements to it. One, as the previous speaker mentioned, is around age verification. And then I think the other area is this broader issue of identity and accountability. And I think I'll come on to age verification, I think, later in our questions, but on this issue around identity and accountability, I think for some of our community on TikTok, it's really important to be able to use TikTok without having to use their real name. So we have one of the biggest trending creators on TikTok at the moment is a young man called Francis Bourgeois. It's not his real name. He chose a different surname, and he's a train spotter. So he spends his time filming himself, watching trains go past, writing down the number of the train. And traditionally, this has been a hobby that has been widely mocked. And so he didn't want to use his real name, and he chose a different name, and he's now become a very big star on TikTok. So for many different reasons, people don't necessarily want to use their real name or their real identity. And I think we need to preserve that. And I think we agree on that. And I think Mr. Quintarelli's proposal is actually about how can we do that without losing the idea of accountability. I think another key area we've seen a debate in the last year has been around the question of, does anonymity lead to more abusive behavior, more criminal behavior? I think the whistleblower Frances Hogan has talked about this a lot. The point that she was making is that it's not anonymity that we see driving hate or driving mobs online, but what she saw was where we have these groups and where you have people clustering online and where their views reinforce each other so that they believe it's okay to express the views that they have, and they encourage each other to be more extreme. Twitter on this platform, but if they were, I'm sure they would point to their experience around the football European Championship last year, and when England were knocked out on penalties by Italy. It still pains me to mention that, but when England were knocked out on penalties by Italy, there was a spike in racial abuse on their platform. But what they saw was that a majority of those users were doing so in their own name. They were still behaving in that same way. So I think it's wrong to fully suggest that anonymity leads to abuse. I think there is a factor there, but I don't think it's the only driving factor. And clearly, there is a benefit to society of having anonymity online. And I'm happy to talk more about age verification, but those are just my initial thoughts.
And I think that's really interesting what you say. So it's not necessarily your anonymity that protects you, but a different mentality and dynamic to the way platforms work, which is very complex and is something that's tricky to get. Definitely tricky to create policy around, because it's a shift, I think, in human and group behavior. I'm just going to turn to Marisa there from Meta, because Facebook has traditionally not allowed the use of pseudonyms on accounts, which suggests that you don't feel people should be anonymous. And I'm quite interested in that, and then how you think the proposal that Stefano has talked about could work for Meta by taking things out to a third party.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation and for the already great presentations. I think that indeed, anonymity can't be seen as something you have or something that you don't have. It really depends on the circumstances and on the service and the objectives of the service. So you said that indeed on what we call the Blue app on Facebook, we've traditionally had a real name policy, but that is not the case for other services that we have. So Instagram and others, where that is not the philosophy or a prerequisite in any way. The idea, though, from a real name policy, I don't think that it has to be in some way understood as in an identified user or as in not preserving anonymity. The idea of a real name policy is that you want people to engage in authentic ways, and the best way to do that when you are in Facebook or social media service is by presenting yourself, your authentic self. Because this is about engaging with friends and family. Other services are about pursuing interests where that aspect is not as important. Now, that doesn't mean that obviously there are circumstances where it is important that there's a certain level of preservation of who you are for very vulnerable, not only vulnerable users, including journalists. And there we have different features and different tools to allow for a strengthened or heightened protection. But I just would say that the anonymity per se, we can't look at it just as a one monolithic thing, and that the approach to anonymity or identification has to be exactly the same for every purpose and for every service, because that probably wouldn't be possible.
Thanks very much. And Max, I just wanted to turn to you because I know at the Tony Blair Global Institute and the work that your unit's done on social media futures, you've thought a lot about this, and the point that Theo made, that actually a lot of the racist abuse we saw after, and not just after the Euros, but constantly online, came from accounts which actually weren't anonymous. So can you tell me a bit about but can you tell me from the other side a bit about the risks of removing anonymity? We've heard about train spotters, but perhaps there's some more other examples that you can point to and from around the world where situations are quite different.
Great, yeah, thanks, Liz. And I do love Francis Bourgeois. It's worth a follow on TikTok. So I think so obviously, like what you mentioned about Twitter and the abuse after the Euros came from both real people with real name accounts and anonymous accounts. But we have to acknowledge there is a perceived immunity people get from anonymity, which may feel they're allowed to say things they wouldn't in person, or abuse people, or create multiple accounts which brigade or kind of coordinate abuse towards figures. So anonymity does play a part in this picture, but as you said, there's a very positive side to anonymity as well. And I think we often talk about the kind of protective ability of anonymity in climates and countries and places around the world where anonymity might be needed to preserve your own freedom, or to not kind of experience violence or abuses of power. But there's a positive side to anonymity as well, that we all partake in day to day, and we all curate our own lives in different ways. And my persona that I use at work or in this call or on Twitter might be different to one I use with friends and family. And so being able to kind of understand your identity in many different levels is quite important. And so identity as well, when kind of anonymity can provide a knowledge creation. Wikipedia, while you can kind of go through and see where people have made edits, is largely kind of done anonymously in various different ways. So knowledge creation is a benefit as well. I would say the important thing about this debate is that what we're missing is often in an online world is this core identity infrastructure. And the work we've done at the Tony Blair Institute is to say that the new infrastructure of state in the 21st century includes identity systems, but importantly, user-centric and privacy and preserving identity systems. And so states and other actors can create these platforms which you can design new services. So I think of it as kind of social architecture. We've moved from a brutalist architecture of the 1950s or in the digital world in the 2000s to a more social design where TikTok and Twitter build tools based on different layers of identity to protect people. So for an example we've discussed and worked on is using a secure digital identity to verify accounts, to provide this optionality for platforms to verify accounts, and that gives certain privileges to people that then creates a kind of protective space. It doesn't mean that you have to essentially strip all anonymity out of everywhere or make online. But what we're missing at the moment is a kind of core sense of like identity that builds trust in systems, and states building that. Apple's built it in a lot of their new developments as well, with their iOS. Can provide lots of optionality to address some of these problems so that we can move away from this quite unhelpful political discussion of whether we should strip anonymity out of the internet.
That's really interesting. And I think the model you talk about is more about creating disincentives for people to continue or start doing, you know, abusing or doing bad things online, as opposed to just blocking them. It's a way of trying to tip back and de-incentivize that behavior, which I think is quite interesting. I'm just going to turn to Marco Pancini now, because I suppose I was thinking about YouTube, and you've been dealing with these issues for a long time, particularly around the issue of copyright. That's been a long-term issue for the company, and that's now added to things like posting of misinformation, age verification. So it would be interested to hear, having dealt with these issues in the long term, what you've learned about managing them, and again, what a new approach like the one Stefano has proposed, what you make of that.
Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you, Euroconsumers, for having me in this very, very interesting conversation. So let me start from your questions, and let me stress some of the points also my colleagues made around the importance of looking at anonymity as you know, as an important component as well of the possibility for user to make sure that they can enjoy of some important fundamental rights online. We always tend to look at this debate, a debate on this issue and on other issue from our own perspective. When we move. We make a step back and we look at the global scenario. We need also to be honest and consider that the issues that we are discussing here, like in Europe, like anonymity or safety or privacy or possibility for minority to have a voice online, have a completely different impact and possible also implication in other region of the world, in other situations. So that's something that we need to consider very, very closely. Anything we are trying to experiment locally in Europe is seen from the rest of the world often as an example. So we carry a huge responsibility. That also leads me to the point about the proposal of Stefano. Then we go back to what we are doing, and you know, it's I actually need a public apology to Stefano, because he spoke to me about this proposal months ago, and I spent weeks in trying to think about that, because potentially is a great idea. The reality is that all the possible ways this can go wrong needs to be very, very closely looked at before we all, as a community, or multi-stakeholder community, we can look in solution like that. For example, the trade-off between security and identification. I'll tell you my personal experience. I am using a lot one of the third-party verification system that we have here in Belgium. I don't give the name, but you know, everyone who's living in Belgium is using it. Is a sort of public-private subject, very helpful in the COVID period, a lifesaver for downloading all the information that we need, in also interacting with your banks, with the public administration. I'm receiving basically every 15 days an SMS to my personal phone number with a spam attempt to ask me to click on this link because my account of the third-party verificators is blocked and I need to unblock it. And I tell you that the first time I received it, I was tempted to click on it because it's a very important tool that I'm using every day. And if it's blocked, I really need to see what's going on. then of course, like, wait, Marco, what are you doing? Like, you don't have to click on it. But the thing that I was receiving an SMS on my personal phone was really changing, in a certain sense, the dynamic. Here, once again, what kind of safety measure we can put around the system? Who is verifying the third party? What are the, also from a consumer, when we think about the solution, we cannot only think about the expert, we need to think the normal user. What kind of system we can build around to make sure that these third parties can really represent an opportunity. So that these are questions. So the two points, the geopolitical aspect and the global implication of using verification system, and the security aspect, I think, need to be taken in consideration on this. Once again, very good idea. Then moving to what we are doing, I think there are also some best practices that are developed by the industry that can be taken in consideration. For example, the use of artificial intelligence, the use of a series of signals that we see on our platform that can help us to go through or to minimize the collection of data for age verification, one example, or to provide more safety to our users. These are all important elements that can be considered in this conversation. Maybe, as Theo said, maybe if we have time later to go more deep into the details of that. So once again, I think it's good to look at solutions. It's good to discuss about possible ideas. These ideas need to take in consideration global implication of their implementation on one side, and put the consumer at the center of the development in order to provide the best of safety experience to consumers. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you very much. Right, we're getting into it now. So I'm going to go back to Stefano and put that question. So who is policing the intermediaries? How do we make sure they're safe and consumers don't face more problems? Sorry, I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Let me first of all welcome the proposal of Marco to keep on the discussion on the proposals and go exploring the details. Of course, this is not the right moment nor place to go into the technical details. Well, of course, what I can say is that I was a computer security professor, so and I'm a technologist. So I would say that there are some details in my proposals. First, for example, the first one, it's a user-initiated process, so there is no prompting that you have to reply to. Then, who policies the trusted third parties? Well, those subjects that should be entitled to do this type of token provision should be audited by our governments. Pretty much the way we are now, we have now for banks, for identity providers under the IDAS scheme, or other entities that are regulated. So there should be some kind of regulation establishing the level of inspection to these subjects. One of the details I added is that the token should be kept offline in order to minimize cybersecurity risk, for example. This should be audited. You must verify that this happens. But once this happens, of course, I mean, the cybersecurity risk is, I would say, solved. Then about the global scalability, that is absolutely an issue. And I tried to draft some ideas at the beginning during my talk. And I said that this can be a homogeneous solution working at a global scale, because we already are relying on some kind of indirect user, not identification, but identificability, the possibility of identifications, when we give some proofs of identity to online services. That is already happening. In any case, these are correct remarks, and I really would welcome the possibility of exploring further the details of these proposals with all the interested parties. Thank you, Marco.
Thanks, Stefano. So commitment there to keep talking. I think the point about the international and the global need for this to work is really interesting. And I just wanted to quickly come back to Marisa from Meta, because one of the criticisms that came from Frances Haugen was the different levels of service that users had in different countries, where there was more attention given to content moderation in particular countries than others. And I just wondered if you had anything to say on that, and whether this would overcome that, having a global solution which would be working for consumers no matter where they lived.
Well, I'm having a little bit of trouble to understand how that fits into anonymity, but perhaps what you're saying is, but it's a very valid question, and it could apply to the question of anonymity or any question content moderation. I think what Frances Haugen was talking about was the fact that, in her opinion, there were some faults as to it was for her apparent that the resources that a company might have in moderating certain content in certain languages might be different from others. And to be very clear, the fact that there's limited resources, that a company does not have infinite resources, is true. And we try to manage it the best we can. But indeed, there's in certain aspects or in certain languages, and the content moderation is more difficult because it requires people that speak them. Not a lot of people speak them. We need to take into account the context. We need to work with others as well. So it is true that in certain languages, doing the job, which is maintaining the platform, making it safe and warranting safety, is more difficult than in other languages like English or Spanish, or where there's more people speaking them on the platform. So that is very true. But indeed, a company like Meta, in all the services that we provide, our ambition is always to be global in nature. And this is really one of the most tangible problems and tensions with policymaking, because a global service needs to deal with not only with local realities and with local laws as well, local understanding, and we have to find that balance, that coexistent balance between the two. So. Indeed, the effect that anonymity can have as a tool or as an obligation in one country, in one society, in one culture is very different than in others. For example, on misinformation, just to give you a tangible example of the differences as well. A piece of misinformation or a piece of content affected from one person to another in one part of the world can lead to real world harm in ways that in another part of the world it wouldn't. So if you're asking whether having to deliver a global service in a world with distinct understandings and identities and cultures, it is an extremely difficult thing to do. So we have to obviously continue to be better. I don't know if that's what you wanted me to talk about, but that's where it led me when I heard you talk about global versus local.
Yeah, no, I was thinking very much about that we have maybe come to this as a Euroconsumers panel thinking very much about that kind of usage, but half the world's online now and global companies are serving many of those people. There's going to be the differences you mentioned, but also levels of capacity for market surveillance and policymakers, and all of those things need to be part of this discussion as well as the technicalities of how a system could work. So where are we now for time? We're coming up to past. We did say we'd talk a little bit about the age verification issue, because it's another one that comes up very much with this kind of third-party model of verification. So one use of this anonymized approach is age verification, and you can immediately think that anonymization and not having your identity exposed would be very important for people accessing particular content. I'm thinking about over 18s accessing adult content, where at the very least it might be embarrassing. At the very worst, it could lead to real physical harm and exclusion and rejection from parts of society. So that's a massive issue there. And then on the other hand, we have services that are aimed at younger users, where you need to maintain this age-appropriate space. And here amongst the panelists, there's been some different approaches. So Marco, YouTube approached this by setting up a completely separate service, YouTube Kids. Can you tell us why you took this approach and whether it's been successful and why you think this is probably could be a better way of achieving this safety?
So look, I think we come to this topic more from a holistic point of view. So it's not just about YouTube Kids, which is, as you say, it is a separate service, and I would say ecosystem that we dedicate to families and children in order to really have a safe experience. Also, when we look at YouTube Main, our approach is really an approach which takes in consideration I would call it a concept of age assurance. So a broad concept where we establish the age of the user using different system, and also considering the sort of important balance that needs to be found between collecting data and minimize the collection of these data as well for the things that we really use. So to say in a different way, when we move up from self-declaration, which is the first step, and still it's a quite important step, to account confirmation age validation, which is, for example, something that we are using in the context of our family link, the service that across all the alphabet services like Google, YouTube, allow parents to have an overview and make informed choice about the experience of their kids and children on our services. Then when we move up, we have also system of age estimation based on the best of our technology, our AI system, which allow us, together with the other two approach that I discussed before, to come with our own estimation of the age of the children, therefore provide to the family and the children a different experience. If I am, for example, coming on YouTube and I watch Peppa Pig and I'm not logged in, the treatment that YouTube makes of the user is as the user is a child, even if maybe I'm an adult. And therefore, like again, the age estimation is a very important point. And finally, age verification still is part of this mix. Of course, it is. Like, for example, I said, YouTube Kids, separate experience for family and kids below 13. Then you have Main, where you have family link and different ways for parents to control the experience of children that are above 13, so can have an account on YouTube. And then what you have, for example, if for content that is still in line with our policies, but we believe it's only for a mature audience, and we cannot infer from the different system that I described before the age of the user. Finally, age verification still is a possible solution to be put in place whenever we want to make sure that somebody that we believe potentially could be a minor wants to watch a piece of content that we believe it's only for a mature audience. So once again, I would call it more in a holistic way, age assurance, different degrees and really use of all the system together in order to maximize safety and minimize user collection.
Okay, thanks very much.
User data collection.
And Theo, TikTok, you immediately think of younger people, and I know my children seem to be on it spend more time with it than they do with me at the moment. But and that content's very appealing both to under 13s and over 13. So what's your approach to protecting young people from inappropriate content? And could you see, back to what Stefano was talking about, a way of a third party way of verification? Would that work?
So safety's our number one priority, and in particular child safety. And I can try and briefly explain our approach to under 13s and over 13s. And then I've got some challenges for Stefano. I'd love to.
Great. Yeah.
So we don't allow under 13 users, and when anyone downloads the app, they have to give their age. We don't prompt them to give the right answer. If they get it wrong, they get blocked, and if they want to appeal, they have to show us proof of age. But that's not the only step we take. It's not just at the front door. It's once you're on the app, we're also constantly trying to make sure that we can remove those who are under 13. We do that in a number of ways. One is that we introduced a button so that anyone can very easily report any other user they believe to be an under 13. Another is that every time any video is flagged to a moderator for any reason, the moderator will review the account to see if that user is under 13. So as a result of these measures, we remove just over 11 million in a 3-month period, 11 million under 13 users in a 3-month period globally. And we now publish those numbers on a quarterly basis. I think we're the only company currently doing that. And you can say whether that's too many or too few, but at least you can hold us to account on that. Now, for over 13s, I think I agree with Marco that the big trend is towards age assurance. And I would add to that age-appropriate design, by which I mean we shouldn't think of childhood as you're either under 13 or over 13, which in some ways is a kind of accident of design of an American legislation rather than a child psychology approach. And I think it's probably healthier to think of the different developmental stages of childhood and then to recognize how that needs to be treated differently. So, for example, for those under 16 on our platform, it's private by default, which means they can post a video, but they can't share it widely. It's only can be shared privately with those they know. People can't comment on a video of an under 16, and there's no direct messaging for those under 16. Now, if you're older, an older teenager, then you have more options. But again, it's that kind of designing the product in a way that is suited to the different ages, and rather than just thinking about it as a single age cutoff. On Mr. Quintarelli's idea, what I really like about it is I think it solves that issue of privacy. That if we asked every parent, every user, every time they use an app, every time they use a website, to have to hand over ID cards, it's a massive privacy risk and a huge amount of data, and it would be a big deterrent to people. So I think it does a great job in solving that. I think there's a couple of other challenges we should also look to see how do we solve, and that's my challenge. One is accessibility. So hopefully most kids have a parent who will go through that process of doing the necessary register to get the token and enable their child to use the device. But maybe not every parent has the time or inclination to do that. The biggest TikTok creator in Italy, in fact, the biggest creator in Europe, is Kabi Lame, whose parent, who had no passport, is an immigrant in Italy. And would his parents have gone through that process for him? I don't know, but I think it's something we should think about. Is what about accessibility? The other factor that I think is really important is competition, and I think if you present to people two options, one is these platforms that you use all the time, and Alphabet and Meta are great companies, and all of us use them, and it's inescapable that we use them. And if they say you can now use another product and you don't need to go through this process because we already know who you are, or the option is you have to go through another process to go through another app, then I think there's a risk there that people stay with the large companies that they're already registered with, that already have their identity, rather than there being new competition in the market. So I think one possible way of tackling that would be, rather than getting every app or every website to do the sort of pinging of the token, could that be done at the App Store level, so that if Apple or Google know the identity and they can do that at the App Store level, then it's a kind of even playing field for everyone else, that they just check with the App Store, and that's kind of less friction there in the market. So that would be kind of one challenge back to Stefano about how do we solve not just privacy but also the competition and accessibility arguments.
That's an interesting idea. Stefano, what do you think of those challenges and even a suggestion for getting over that?
Okay. First of all, thank you again, and I welcome the idea of keeping on discussing the details, because this is very relevant. I would like to comment first on what has been said before. I believe that this topic is evolving, and the whole way how we are regulating is evolving, and I see a greater fragmentation in the ways how we deal with this is coming between lenders in Germany, among different lenders, states in Europe, etc. And of course, there is an issue about a global possibility, but then we can discuss in detail about that. But if we don't, we are going to have a greater degree of fragmentation, I believe. To this last suggestion of the idea of the competition issues, well, as he was talking, I was thinking that effectively, and it's something that I never thought before, this type of procedure is fair and it's doable and it's manageable also for smaller players, not only for the large players who can afford to have a very sophisticated AI team working on these platforms. So effectively, it opens competition on because it levels the field with smaller players in terms of capability on how to manage these issues. So this is key. The fact of moving identification to the store level, well, I don't see it as a pro-competition issue, really, because, for example, if I own a Huawei phone without a Google App Store, so it's somehow I would be cut out of it. So it needs to be universal. And there are already some entities that have universal that provide universal service to the universality of users that cannot deny their services. And these everywhere in the world, online, I mean, with know your customer procedures. I'm not saying that we need to refer to credit cards, although somebody does, or to banks, etc. There might be different players with different degrees of identifiability, because the key here is that you are not identifiable, you are identifiable. You're not identified, you are identifiable. So this is an important thing. So I would be somehow, it's something that we can think about the pros and the cons, but I would be more worried to rely on the gatekeepers of the stores rather than to institutionally audited and surveilled bodies. For example, I see this as a clear evolutionary path for consumers associations. I mean, consumers associations have a trust relationship with the members. This could be a service that is provided by a consumer association, not only consumer association, other players. The important thing is that we have a framework in place that says, if you provide this service, then you're going to be audited, and you have a minimal set of obligations to comply with.
I'm going to stop you there because we're coming towards the end, and we had a couple more panelists wanted to come in on this idea, and I'm going to ask them to comment and respond, and then also to just give a final comment as we come nearer to the close. So first to Marco, and then I'll come to Max.
Thank you so much, Liz. And quickly on this idea, look, I think the global success of TikTok is a testament of the highly competitive environment we are all active on. And, if you come with a good idea and a compelling service, you can gain a global audience quickly. But the counterpart of this is that all of us, and we need to be responsible players in this environment. We need to come with effective solutions that, as I said before, can assure maximum as good as possible safety experience to our users and minimize user data collection in order to meet both legal and user expectation on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Marco. And Max, just to you for a response and perhaps a summing up comment on where you think these kind of ideas could go next.
Yes, so I think it's I think that's a really interesting idea from Theo. It reminds me of some other proposals that others in Stanford, Francis Fukuyama have developed around middleware and making kind of services or platforms open to others to use. So tokenization through trusted parties like an app store might be an interesting way to approach the issue. I would say as well that like there's a important role of regulation creating the right incentives for services in good and responsible design, including age assurance. Well, I mean, we've got to credit the age appropriate design code in the UK for these innovations of these platforms. And I know they're doing great things to design the platforms, but the impetus and the spur of this is definitely a kind of a regulatory one. Although I do think we're seeing a lot of innovations in privacy protecting technology and anonymity protection, particularly in the US. In big companies and fraud and in fintech in the UK is one where we're seeing particular innovation. I would say the kind of trade-off that platforms have to make is between friction in getting users onto their services and safety. And we've talked a lot about the kind of age verification, but there's also a point about adults and protecting and making sure you understand who are adults on the platform as well. Maybe a bit of friction in the process would help other issues, for example, in kind of sharing misinformation, platform design to kind of encourage responsible behavior. And to sum up, I would say this is a kind of a much bigger issue than just simply one about kind of anonymity online. It's about trust, fundamental trust people have in technology and systems, and the trust in the use of data and the use of advanced analytics and machine learning to make decisions in society. And platforms that we've heard from today have a responsibility to make sure they build privacy protecting services, they build trusted services and work with each other where possible to build that trust, because the whole system of progress, the whole ability for us to improve the lot of other citizens in society depends on citizens trusting the use of their data. So it's a kind of much broader responsibility that everybody has here.
Thanks very much, Max. It's reminding me of conversations I had many years ago about password managers, which when you sit in a room of technologists and policy people sounds such a simple and perfect idea. And then I mention it to friends and they're just like, why would I trust, who would I trust to have all my passwords? And it's at that level, the consumer reaction is, I still feel like I'm handing over an awful lot of me and my security to someone that I don't know. And I think perhaps that's what's underpinning a lot of these conversations. Okay, we're coming up towards the end. I just wanted to ask for super quick final comments from everyone before I turn to Marie-Paule. Marie-Paule, who's going to sum up with a short reflection from her point of view. But if I could say, this is about starting the conversation and we don't want to leave the discussion here. So what do you think everybody would be the next thing we need to really talk about in terms of this conversation? So Theo, what do you think? Is it competition? Is it security? Or what would be your final comment?
Well, I think clearly the way that things are heading, that there is a huge appetite across Europe for better forms of identification. And I think, having been through the pandemic, and as Mark was suggesting, I think the fact that we've all had to use apps to verify very personal medical details about ourselves, just to go to the shops, just to go to a restaurant, I think that's kind of changed our understanding of how identification can work. So I think this is an issue that's become more important, and I think it's great that we're having this discussion, and I think it's really important that consumer groups play a leading role in this, so it's not just a discussion between the companies and the politicians. So I welcome this debate, and I'm looking forward to taking it forward.
Thank you. Marco, any closing comments from you on what we need? What are you and Stefano going to talk about next?
Look, I think these solutions and these ideas are worth of further discussion. I think we need to think holistically about this solution. We cannot only think to solve the single issue, but really we need to look at these solutions as empowering consumers, in particular parents, to have a safe experience online and to have a better control of the online environment in a way which is easy to use.
Thank you very much, and thanks for your brevity. Stefano, just finally, what have you taken from today's discussion to help you developing this idea?
I think that nothing is more powerful of an idea whose time has come, somebody said. I think that the time is coming because of what Theo said about how we now are, the pandemic has just put us in a pool, in a digital pool, and we must all start to swim, even those who are not able to swim. So digital identity is the key. There are going to be some evolutions in digital identity at European level within the EIDAS framework. There is a proposal for an evolution of the regulation. So I think the time is right to start a thorough discussion on this. Security is absolutely an issue. Privacy is absolutely an issue. Competition is an issue. And I think that what I would like to happen is to enlarge this discussion to other relevant parties within the Commission, namely those that deal with competition and technical aspects and DigiConnect, so digital identity, etc. Because time has come, really. Maybe it could even be some kind of self-regulation. Let's start with a self-regulation, an experiment, or something. Things are going to happen. In Italy, we have. I started and I oversaw the building of the Italian digital identity system, SPID. We now account more than 28 million users, and we are now going to announce soon in Italy the digital identity for kids. That is very helpful for school, for remote distance studying, etc. And that has a lot of privacy built in it.
Okay.
So
there may be some lessons there. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stop you there so we don't overrun, but thank you.
No, we will definitely need to keep on talking.
Yeah, absolutely. And Marie-Paule, just a few final words from you on what you've learned today and what you've taken away, but if I could ask you to be very brief.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this to participate to this panel where I think I could hear with a lot of satisfaction the fact that all the big platforms which are participating today are developing their tools, to do age verification, for example. I think that this is very important, and that they are also implementing this in a different layers of age. What content can be accessible. I think that this is very important. I also had a dream, quite a long time ago, of this digital identity for consumers, where they could also identify not only who they are, but also what they want to be exposed to. And in particular, I think there is a lot of discussion at the moment on targeted advertising. I think that very important for consumers to be in a position to really manage how their details are shared among a number of traders. Of course, here it's my hat as a consumer protection specialist, but this kind of system where you set your preference for many different types of things, I think should be super useful. And I'm quite confident by listening to you that technology can assist really to find solutions.
Absolutely. We just need the collective will to get there. Okay, we've run over slightly and I'm really sorry about that, but I didn't want to close the discussion as it was getting very interesting. So thank you so much everyone for your participation, to Max, to Marco, Stefano, Marie-Paule, Theo and Marisa, who's now left us. And thanks again to Euroconsumers for hosting this, and we will see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you. It's been a pleasure. Do you have an idea?